It's your Dean Quinn show, which I really enjoy.
You know, how many people are you gonna pay? You don't have any customers. So,
Yeah, it's also, I don't know how to have, go to one way or the other. It's 7:30 o'clock and nobody speaks about it, that's fine with me.
A lot of conferring going on.
So we're going to have a public hearing, Tita, so, you know, it's like, this is an opportunity for anybody that has concerns about that.
I don't have concerns about it.
Yeah, me neither. It's fine with me.
So I. I am. Danielle, nice to meet you. Well, it was weird meeting with the and it came up with this here that some of this has not printed.
What is going on?
And I noticed that every place that goes to the data out, this one's really background. So I don't know. Maybe that I just. Anyway, so. And we're. E and F. Yeah, and that's good.
Well, you're going to need 3 votes to do that.
Anyway. Yes, thank you for coming over, Marty. Glad to meet you. Are you getting used to it? Now, where'd you move from?
Well, I'm not going to argue with you about that.
I was just going to mention, did you see Lisa's email that
Yes.
she might not be here for the work session, but
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the work session. Work sessions are an opportunity for board members to discuss issues informally with staff and invited guests. The board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion. There's generally no opportunity for public comment. Members of the board wishing to address the board are welcome to do it during the board's regular scheduled meeting. Tonight we're going to have a work session on the Forest 80 and Agriculture Forest Zone at the request of a couple of the commissioners who wanted some clarifications on some of their concerns. Probably saw the memo that went out with Chris's. Did you see that, Commissioner Thompson?
Mm-mm. We got it yesterday, yeah. No.
Okay. Was it, it wasn't sent to everybody, was it?
I do have a copy if anybody wants to look at it.
And then we just got yesterday.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question was is that somehow the county charter, Commissioner Thompson asked somehow the county charter over rule state law, and his opinion is fairly clear on that. And so, anyways, that's that item. I'll let you go ahead, Gail, and address some of the issues that some of the folks have.
Okay, thank you. So I put together just a very condensed version. Very quickly, our timelines, just to refresh everyone's memory, is we started this process back in December of 2015. The board signed a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and you also appointed an ad hoc committee to work with the Planning Commission. They began that work in February of 2016 and worked for pretty much a good solid 2 years on it to come up with the changes that are before you, or were before you 2 weeks ago. We had hoped to have this process completed in May 27, but we didn't get to a final vote with the Planning Commission until May of this year. And then we did our first public hearing back on June 13th. So the changes affect 7 different zoning districts. The RA1, which is a residential agriculture zone, the RA2, the RA5, and the RA10 zones. These zones are primarily intended for low-density residential, but they do also allow some limited agricultural and other types of uses. So the changes that are proposed would add agritourism and farm stand structure to all of those zones, and that would be as a conditional use. It would also add to the RA5 and the RA10 commercial uses in conjunction with a farm use. And the only reason that I can come up with why the commercial activity wasn't included with RA1 and RA2 is that those are pretty small lots. They're a minimum 2-acre lot size, and many of them are substandard. And I think there may have been some concerns about how commercial activities on small lots in the middle of a residential area might impact neighborhoods. So I'll stop at that point. Are there any questions right now on these? Yep.
So when we had Sam that was on a smaller farm that came and spoke, how does that affect him if they want to sell something on their smaller land?
Okay, so if I remember correctly, he is zoned RA5. So he gets the agritourism, he gets the farm stand, and he can also do other types of commercial uses related to the farm and the farm products on his property. So that's already included in these proposed changes. Now, one thing I am a little unclear about is specific uses that people may want to see on these smaller parcels. And, granted, I haven't been here through the entire process, but the meetings that I have attended, I've not heard specific uses that, we might want to include. Things that do come up in my head would be maybe allowing the commercial uses on the smaller lots in the RA1 and the RA2. Something else that popped into my head would be, what about a winery, a small winery? Would that be appropriate in some of these smaller residential districts? So really, without more information from the people who are farming the land, who are the owners of the land, it's a little difficult for me to say specifically what uses they want and what might not be appropriate. So
May there also be different levels of commercial activity?
we could craft language that would, tier the level of commercial activity. We could do that, yes.
I would think that we would, rather than do that now and delay this further, I would think that we would wait on that. That could be done later, right?
Yes, it could be done later, or it could be split out now and you move forward with the other zones and we work on this, or, it's really at the policy and the direction that the board want to take.
You're just talking about the RA1 and 2, or are you talking about all of it, as far as listing the possible commercial uses?
I would go back and look at all 4 of these RA zones.
Okay, so the Planning Commission did not list, is that right, all of the uses that were possible?
There were, coming out of state statute, the resource zones, the exclusive farm use, the F80, and the agriculture forestry zones. Their uses are pretty much specified by state statute. When it comes to these zones here, we have more leeway as a county to determine what's appropriate and what's not. So again, in the discussions, and which were very few that I was able to partake in since I started here, I did not hear specific uses come from the planning board or the planning ad hoc members, except agritourism was the really big thing that they were concerned about.
And so I'm going to assume that they did not want to specify and limit everything that anybody could think of, because part of, now I'm not positive because I wasn't, at any of those meetings, but part of the problem here is this is new. And these people have to be quite creative in order to keep their land economically viable. And if we list everything and then everything outside of that is not allowed, that could be a problem. I would say let it be more general. This is my opinion. And if there are problems with activities, then go back and change it.
So, and I don't disagree in principle, but the way our code operates is that if it's not specifically listed as being permitted, it's assumed that it's not permitted, that it's prohibited. So if we can find a way to add more general language addressing some of the farm use concerns, that would be fine.
Why did the Planning Commission not do that?
Again, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
I don't understand that.
I don't know the answer, I'm sorry. And I didn't go back and listen to the whole 2 years worth of record there.
So you're saying that everything has to be listed that could possibly be allowed, or otherwise none of it is allowed. And everything that is listed is only what is allowed, and something outside of that is not allowed?
Generally speaking, yes. I mean, we have a bit of latitude so that if somebody wants to open a farm store, but it says garden supply store, we have the latitude to make that judgment call and say that's a similar enough use that we can allow it. But if it says farm store and they say, well, we want to do 50-person farm-to-table dinner, that might be something completely different. So.
What if it just says whatever they want to do is a conditional use? Then do they have to come to the county and ask, can this happen, and then what's the process for that?
So if something is listed as a conditional use, there will be specific standards in the code that they have to meet. They would submit the application, they submit information about how they meet those standards. We review the information they submit. We write our own conclusions and analysis based on that information. And then as the director, or if it requires a public hearing, then the planning commission or the hearings officer would look at that entire record and say, yes, it meets those conditions, or no, it doesn't.
If I may, I think, I see the dilemma you're in, because here's what the law says and requires and allows. And you're obliged to present us an ordinance that meets those conditions. We hear from constituents, I mean, I'm assuming everybody does, hears from constituents who are trying to basically make a living and keep a new use that's traditional but got lost somewhere, and so they want to have a resurgence, a renaissance almost, of locally produced food that's healthy, that, you know, is good for the land, it's good for the people. They need to be able to make a living. We don't want them to trouble their neighbors. We don't want them to create problems. On the other hand, if there's a way we can support these economic development activities that are good for the people in the place, it makes sense that we do that. Is that the sense of what you're both saying?
My comment was, from what I listened to public comments at the last meeting, there was concern that on some of the smaller farms, they may be precluded from doing certain things. And that's when I was asking about the levels of commercial activity, because, you know, selling homemade jam on a 5-acre lot may not cause any problem with the neighbors, but maybe it's prohibited the way this is written. So that's the level that I'm talking about. I mean, obviously, a 5-acre farm is not going to be able to do the same as a 500-acre farm.
Right.
But people that have a 5-acre farm may be able to make a living if they have this and this in place. And that was my question. I just wanted to see if there's a way that we can make sure, if we've heard from them, that these are some things that that would be helpful to them, because indeed you do have to be creative to make a living in this sort of thing. But there is a resurgence in small farms. So is that what you heard at the last, when people were talking?
That was my general understanding, that they wanted additional uses available. But again, the specifics of what those uses are is what eludes me at this point. So I don't know if they're asking for the ability to do firearm facilities or dog training, or if they're just looking for more commercial uses associated with the farm. There wasn't a level of specificity that at least I understood. So.
And so, from what I'm hearing today, are you saying that there needs to be specific examples, or can this be, when they ask for a permit, that a decision can be made in the planning commission or planning department on if that would be allowed or not?
Well, we need to have it spelled out somewhat in the code. So, for example, in the RA1 zoning district, minimum 2-acre lot size. Right now, with the proposed changes, we would not allow commercial activity in conjunction with the farm use. And if you can bear with me, I can probably find a definition for that. But if we wanted to do that, then we would have to list it in the RA1 zone. And then if we want to limit it because it's a smaller property, then we would need to figure out if it's limited to certain size farm stand or something, or, certain square footage of your property can be dedicated to the commercial use, or is it only certain types of commercial activities like selling products, or, can I open up my land to, petting zoo or hay rides, or there just has to be some parameters there.
Well, but it says added agritourism and farm stand structure.
Yes,
So agritourism takes in a lot.
it does.
Well, how in the world can everything be listed under agritourism? And who makes that decision?
The agritourism definition came from the state statute.
And what does it list?
It lists many things. Hold on here. Sorry, I don't have my definitions in order here. All right.
Do we have any wineries currently in the county? I don't think we do we? We currently have any, I know there was verbiage in here for wineries.
Yeah,
but I
I'm
don't-
not sure if we do or not.
Probably will in the future, I would
Global
guess.
warming.
With global warming, yeah.
Okay. So agritourism is defined as a common farm-dependent activity that is incidental and subordinate to a working farm, which promotes successful agriculture and generates supplemental income for the owner. It includes things such as hay rides, corn mazes, and other similar uses that are directly related to on-site agriculture. Any assembly of persons shall be for the purpose of taking part in agriculturally based activities such as animal or crop care, tasting farm products, or learning about farm or ranch operations. Agritourism may include farm-to-plate meals. Except for small farm-themed parties, agritourism does not include weddings, celebratory gatherings, parties, or regularly occurring similar uses. So it covers a very broad range of things, and again, this comes back to the lack of specificity. I'm hearing property owners say, we want more uses, but again, I'm not sure what uses they want that they're not getting right now, so.
What about artists that are living on a farm that may want to have some art classes on their farm, or maybe have some musical gatherings on their farm? Because my understanding from working with in hospitality, part of this agritourism is to spread tourism out to other areas, and also to get people to experience other regions that they wouldn't maybe normally do. And it seems like an artistic endeavor on a farm would do the same thing, even though it's not necessarily growing a crop. Would that be precluded from this?
As I read the definition, I would say that it's precluded because it's strictly tied to the working farm. So, unless they're actually growing canvas and harvesting it and creating canvases for artist work, then I would say that it doesn't fall under the definition of agritourism.
But does that get in the way of property right if there's an artist that's living there and chooses, and this is the way they make a living? Does that prevent them from making their living on their own property?
It would prevent them from holding events. They can still create their artwork there. They can market their artwork on the internet. They can market their artwork through galleries or art fairs or art shows. But in terms of being in an agriculture zoning district and using the agritourism definition or use as a way to promote their art, again, as I read the definition, I would say that that does not fall under agritourism.
But people, like if someone, I don't know, I just think there's a lot of uses that happen in farms that may not be listed, like Commissioner Neberker said, that I think may be problematic.
So, but again, in these RA zones where we do have latitude, then you can put in things like artist studios, art-related workshops. and things like that that aren't necessarily spelled out in the code right now.
I think we should. I think that would be helpful to do that, because I know that there are artists that are doing that. I just visited a farm, it wasn't in this, it was north of here, but,
And the other thing is, if we were to review this more frequently and really be willing to gather constituent input on these issues, I think we'd all have a better idea of how to go forward. I think we all agree it took too long for it to happen again, and I realize it makes a demand on staff time. But as we're looking at how to support ongoing economic development here, I think it's important that we be willing to do the work to review and revise as needed, so that we're gathering information and we're planning on using that information to amend as we should.
so this is an amendment of our current codes to meet state statutes that are new, and it hasn't been revised in a while, is that correct?
That's correct, since
Oh.
probably the early 90s.
But that doesn't mean that we can't come back and adjust it after we do this first second reading of it, correct?
Right, we can amend our codes anytime that we choose to do so, as long as they're compliant with all the other regulations. And again, in these 4 zoning districts that aren't necessarily strictly regulated by state statute, we have a lot more latitude than you would in an exclusive farm use zone, which is very narrowly defined and limited by state law.
Okay, now I'm going to go against what I had said earlier. What if we were to reach out to the original ad hoc committee that gave input in the beginning and ask them to list their needs, what it is that they see is necessary to keep their farms viable, and then consider those uses? I say I'm going against what I had said, is that would be a delay.
But we can certainly do that. I mean, we can't schedule it, I don't think, for the July 10th Planning Commission meeting, but we could schedule it for their August meeting, and then just take the ordinance back to them and let them.
I think their
review it.
season is pretty much lost anyway. I think
Actually, I've heard differently from my constituents, so I would ask you not to do that. I would ask us to go ahead and pass this and be willing to revise it soon after. So if we could not hold up the approval of this, but be willing to amend it in short order, I would be for that. But I have people telling me, look, we are really desperate to get started.
Okay. Well, what does that look like as far as if we were to approve this and then amend it?
Okay, and then what we would do is we have to do a 35-day notice to Department of Land Conservation and Development, which would set us in motion. It should be sufficient enough that we could do it during the first meeting or the Planning Commission meeting in August, reconvene, same time frame, reconvene the ad hoc committee, take the drafts there, and then have them review it. So how long it will stay with the Planning Commission and the ad hoc committee, that's completely at their discretion. So I can't really predict a time frame beyond that.
Okay, so even without all of those specific uses, we can go ahead and approve this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm agreed.
Then you're going to continue with your presentation?
Yes. Were there any more questions about these 4 zones right now? Okay.
Oh, just one. They're talking about needing to have other structures, like in hardship, where they move an RV or something on the land so that they can take care of an elderly parent or something. And there's a 2-year restriction, or they come back and check that. Are there any restrictions on cars? I've got reports from constituent that the land next to them, the person is amassing a lot of junk cars, and it's lowering the value of their land. And when they've come to the county, they have been told that there isn't anyone to go out and check that. You know, are there restrictions against creating a junkyard on your property, and how are we addressing that when we have, I mean, these folks said that the lowering of their value of what they want to sell their home for is significant, and they feel like they're not getting the help that they need from the county.
Okay, so we do have a definition in the code that says if you have 2 or more inoperable vehicles on your property, it's considered an auto wrecking yard. Auto wrecking yards are only allowed in certain zoning districts, and they're pretty heavy industrial use areas. So I would suspect that your constituent's property is probably not in one of those zones. The way that the county does do code enforcement right now, it's the planning staff picks it up complaints as they have time to investigate. We do have a request in this year's budget, or next year's upcoming budget, to fund 1 full-time code compliance specialist. The way that we have the program structured right now is that complaints that are life safety oriented, people dumping raw sewage, people living in houses without water and electricity and things like that, get the top priority, and there are a lot of those cases out there. From then we move down the ladder of violation and imperativeness, for lack of a better word. So where this would fall, this is probably on a scale of 1 being the highest priority to 4 being the lowest. I would say it's probably somewhere in between a 2 or a 3.
By the county's idea. That's not how they feel about it. But.
Right, yeah.
So this, I know, I remember that we have increased it to, how many enforcers do we have at the present moment?
Planning staff as they have time. So we have no dedicated code compliance specialist.
This will be the first, this will be a dedicated full-time person.
Correct.
So I can encourage my constituents to come and to ask for help again, because the next budget year is next week.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right, so if there's no more questions, I'll move on here quickly. We've talked about this. We've talked about the minimum lot sizes. And then just quickly, in the remaining time we have left, the other 3 zones are the resource zones: exclusive farm use, the forestry 80, and the agriculture forestry zone. I tried to put in here a breakdown of what was added and what was removed. And since we don't have much time, you should have all gotten the handout with the slides on there that spells all this out. But the only thing that was permanently removed and not just relocated or something new that was added, the only thing that was completely deleted is this small tracts, poor soil dwelling unit. And the reason that that was deleted is because that language is no longer in state statute. Other than that, all the uses that are in here, they've been moved around. Some have gone from being over-the-counter permits to being conditional uses. Some have gone the other way. Some have gone from having a public hearing requirement to being just over-the-counter. But the uses are all still there. And we've added in a lot of new things like on-site filming, mass gatherings, trying to think, landscape contracting businesses. So I know that's a very quick summary. We have about 3 minutes left, and
I hadn't read that agenda. I thought we had our typical hour work session, and I saw that it was just a half an hour, which was unfortunate.
Yeah. So it's a very condensed version. Again, the only use we completely took out was small tracts, poor soils, because that was changed in state law. Everything else is still there, even if it is not in the same place.
I have a couple more quick questions.
Okay.
I might have to get with you later, but the commercial uses, dog training, we had problems a couple years ago with puppy mills out in the county. That of course is, how does that figure into this? The, dog training classes, trials and whatnot. We don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a specific definition for dog trainings and trials.
Or who would be responsible for knowing when that has gone over the line into an abusive situation?
Again, it's going to become a code complaint, and then at that point, I believe we'd work with animal control.
Okay. And the other question I have is on utility solid waste disposal facilities. Mm-hmm. My mother back in Michigan My town I grew up in is now getting looked at for putting the brine from fracking into some privately owned wells, which of course, your well is all of our wells because we're all connected. Is there any, I didn't see anything specifically against dumping that kind of stuff in a well in the county.
Yeah, I don't believe that we have addressed anything in terms of what you can put in your well. For the most part, wells are regulated by the state through the water resources or water master, and so we really don't regulate wells at the county level. So, I mean, I guess we could put something in the ordinance, but again, we don't, as far as I'm aware, we don't have anything addressing that or addressing fracking.
Yeah, this is a byproduct of fracking. And then also under the forest, that there are dwellings that can be put on forest land. Is there any way that we can put into our county code that you can't spray pesticides around the residential area of the workers? I don't know if that's a big problem in the county, if that's something we can look at. I know it's a problem in more the southern part of the county, I mean the state.
Okay, yeah, so I did check with Department of Forestry. I have not gotten a response, but the Forest Practices Act does require a minimum 60-foot buffer strip for aerial spraying around schools and inhabited dwellings. And I'm waiting to hear back from Department of Forestry if we can increase that, but I would suspect that's similar to what we're dealing with the siting criteria for the FERC facilities and the other zoning districts. Given its Forest Practices Act, I'm not sure if we'll be able to do that.
And the same thing with the grinding for the mining for rock and whatnot. There's no, for the noise and disruption of farms that live close to that, there doesn't seem to be any restrictions on that in this. If you happen to be by that, then it's just too bad for you. Is that kind of our code right now?
Yeah, other than our standard noise ordinance, which talks about quiet hours and things like that. Again, those would be the regulations regarding noise for the county.
Thank you for your work on this.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
I did go to a workshop on aerial spraying and brought back folders.
Thanks for setting that up for us. Appreciate the information. Okay, we're going to take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll get regular for our